Hello dear friends, Monday, January 30th, 2024. A very warm day today. We got a light rain. It's a couple of degrees above zero. And I wanted to do a quick review for you today on this book as we close out the year 2024. It's called In Defense of Canada, Reflections of a Patriot by Michel Maisonneuve. He's a retired lieutenant general with the Canadian Armed Forces. Now, he says that one of the things that inspired him to write this book was that he gave a speech when he received an award for his service of many years to the UN and all this stuff. And he said that that speech gained him a lot of notoriety and pushback and cancellation efforts by the left because he was, presenting ideas that are anti-woke. But he never includes the speech in the book, so I thought that was a little bit unusual. I was kind of expecting it to be in here somewhere, unless it's in there and he doesn't mention it, or he maybe just, incorporates the speech into the overall thing of the book. The book is well written. It's very well done. It does bog down a little bit in some parts that it becomes very mainstream conservative talking points, which is fine. But I'm just going to go through each chapter quickly. I'm not going to do a chapter by chapter review. I'm just going to go. He gives history. Chapter 1 is called Beginning. Chapter 2, Canada's Glorious Past. He talks about how Canada was stronger on the world stage in the past from World War II, contributing, thousands and thousands of troops, over 100,000 troops in World War II, to today where we don't even have that many in our entire Canadian Armed Forces. So, Chapter 3, Canada exits the world stage. And then I'm just going to share with you a couple of notes that I thought were in particular of note to share with you in this review. And I'll probably transcribe, paraphrase of those notes in the description below this video. So let me just go through here quickly. Chapter 4, Radical Agendas. And he talks about the new policies being introduced through the education system and DEI in particular, which is addressed in Chapter 5, DEI, Democracy and Meritocracy. And here he mentions, he says, there are many ordinary Canadians who want to debate the merits of DEI policies but are afraid to speak out. But being attacked on social media or by work colleagues can be frightening, so they remain silent while the frustration simmers. It may one day bubble over, may already be doing so. It appears the backlash has begun and the tide is starting to turn. Make no mistake, loosening DEI's hold on our institutions cannot happen overnight, as it has become deeply integrated into our world. It may take generations to walk back the damage caused. So, this is what's happening. Some corporations are starting to abandon their DEI policies. I believe Toyota walked back some of their policies. But I would be interested to know how this formed in the first place, to get a good historical account of how that was formed and implemented. And I just wrote in the sidebar here, I said, where does this attack come from? And the whole formation of the DEI implementation, I'm guessing it came from a glitch in the singularity and how it was programmed, and that is used to be the invisible hand guiding the global leadership, through the World Economic Forum and so on and so forth. But he doesn't really address that source of these DEI policies, of which we have now become so familiar. He says here on page 66, forcing the DEI agenda on the world has eroded the freedom and rights inherent in democracies. The majority no longer rules. The obsession to give minorities and special interest groups a voice, also an essential part of democracy, has mutated into an assault on the majority. And that is, very important, right? He says here, in the simplest of terms, why does one voice have to be erased to allow another? The very definition of inclusive is to embrace all voices. all ideals, religions, and color. Sadly, that is not the case today. Anything that doesn't conform to the DEI agenda is offensive and must be erased. It can take many seemingly trivial forms: erasing a historical figure who doesn't fit the mold, removing a Christmas tree in front of City Hall, censoring a library book that uses the language of the time in which it was written, and so on and so forth. Offensive, triggering, microaggressions. These terms have come to define the culture of what is still existing for a majority of Canadians. In today's world, if one person is offended by the Christmas tree at City Hall, down it comes, despite 87% of Canadians surveyed saying they celebrate Christmas. So that's interesting. See, he's talking about, he's saying that now the Canadian Canadian Armed Forces members are now forced to identify their pronouns, right? So probably when they're exchanging emails and what have you, or even discussing things in meetings, they have to identify their pronouns, imagine. In Canada as a whole, Statistics Canada reports that in 2022, 4% of the population over age 15 identifies with one or more elements of this demographic, that demographic being the LGBTQ plus community. So 4% of the population over the age of 15. And you know, you can see that it is the minority. He says here, historically, meritocracy has proved to be the most successful method of hiring and promoting the best person for the job. The concept of merit is unarguably fair and inclusive. The best outcomes will be achieved with the best people at the helm. Give Canadians some credit for recognizing imbalances and making the changes necessary to foster success. Use inclusive meritocracy. The success of one group of individuals does not have to come at the expense of another. Working together is the way to achieve this goal. Merit does not see color, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or religion. It only sees merit. He says, DEI has eroded these democratic principles upon which Canada was founded. Our great history proves that these concepts are successful. It's time to swing the pendulum back to common sense. Democracy and meritocracy cannot continue to be sacrificed to the extremism of DEI. And I thought that this is a very lucid, reasonable type of request that Michel Maisonneuve is making in his book upon the population of Canada. He's suggesting that we should follow a meritocracy rather than this DEI, which caters to the minority of individuals within Canada. And he presents a very, very reasonable argument. I'm not going to go into all the details. Chapter 7, the economy in crisis. He spends the chapter talking about the economy. Chapter 8 is called immigration. He talks about immigration. He gives a very poignant story here about when his mother-in-law first came. His in-laws, one came from Ukraine and one came from Germany, and it talks about the struggles to adapt. He says, my mother-in-law decided to splurge and counted out the 50 cents. She went to a market when she first arrived in Hamilton, and she was hoping to have it's been months since she's eaten a fresh egg, and so she saw a vendor selling fresh eggs. She said, how much? 50 cents was the reply. And she paused. That's a lot, she said. This is when she first came to Canada. Well, everything's getting expensive, said the farmer. She decided to splurge and counted out the 50 cents. The farmer grabbed the bag and started counting out a dozen eggs. She stared at him and gasped, I gave you 50 cents. To which he replied, yes, and I'm giving you a dozen eggs. She thought she was only getting one egg for her hard-earned 50 cents. So she ended up going home and having a feast of scrambled eggs with her family. So these kind of stories about how difficult it was when immigrants first came to Canada after World War II during the late 40s and 50s. He says here on page 93, he says, my view is simple. Canada was built on Judeo-Christian values. These are still good values. They emphasize acceptance, forgiveness, equality, reward for hard work, and democracy. It is common sense that the laws must apply to all citizens and not be modified for special interest groups or minorities. It is not okay to burn down churches and then be told by your government that it is understandable. It is not. And he's making a reference to the response from our Liberal government on the church burning. So, oh, it's understandable. It's time for Canadians to speak out and demand our country back. That's what he mentions on page 94, and he lists a lot of solid statistics and details about what works and what doesn't. Chapter 9, he talks about the military, and he goes into very specific detail on how our military has been degraded during the time of the Liberal administration. And for any other countries out there wanting to get an analysis of Canada's current state of military capability, all they have to do is read this chapter and realize that Canada's military is essentially in a shambles, which is very, very unfortunate to read, but I'm not going to go into all the details about it. He says that currently the Canadian Armed Forces is comprised of about 100,000 positions, and 16,500 are unfilled, so there's only about 83,500 in all the Canadian Armed Forces, which is less than it's ever been since World War II. Basically, a non-functioning military, you could almost say. And he makes a footnote on page 117 to implement the government's new Indo-Pacific strategy in light of the threat posed by China. All the CF could manage was to reroute a single ship from the Atlantic to the Pacific. As one of Canada's greatest historians, Jack Grenestein, has said, Beijing must be shaking in its boots. He's making a joke about how insignificant Canada's presence is in the Indo-Pacific region. He says, let's not put weak individuals in positions that demand mental strength and fighting abilities. That is what an operational military requires. He mentions that on page 121. So yeah, he talks a lot about military because that's what he is expert in. So if you're interested in details on Canada's current military capability, this would be a must-read for you. But it goes into a lot of details about the military, of which, and I'll just like to finish with this couple of paragraphs from chapter 10, which I think is very significant, which you probably heard about in the news. Prime Minister Trudeau promised during his 2015 election campaign that veterans would not have to fight the government in court for support and benefits. After 2 years of fighting the government in court, Brock Blazenik, a veteran who lost a leg to an IED in Afghanistan, reminded the Prime Minister of his promise at an Edmonton Town Hall meeting in 2018. He says, I was prepared to be killed in action. What I wasn't prepared for, Mr. Prime Minister, is Canada turning its back on me. The reply this young veteran received from the Prime Minister should have made Canadians weep. Justin Trudeau said, why are we still fighting against certain veteran groups in court? Responded the PM, because they are asking for more than we are able to give right now. That's what the Prime Minister said to this guy who was fighting in court to get some kind of compensation after losing a leg in Afghanistan to an IED. And now he goes on to here, he says, it is telling that this exchange took place 6 months after the Liberal government issued a formal apology along with a $10.5 million check to Omar Khadr, a convicted Al-Qaeda terrorist. He was convicted in the U.S. Military Commission Court of Law, who in the summer of 2002 killed an American medic, Sergeant Christopher Spear, with a hand grenade during a firefight in Afghanistan. The apology and the deal were kept secret from the Canadian public until presented as a fait accompli. So it was already a done deal when it was finally announced that they gave this guy, Omar Khadr, $10.5 million because they had apparently kept him in prison or whatever the reason was. And yet the Liberal government couldn't even support this individual veteran from Afghanistan who lost a leg in combat on behalf of Canada. So it shows you how horrifically upside down and twisted the morality of our Prime Minister is to even make such a statement. He says, you veterans are asking for more than we're able to give right now. And he goes and gives $10 million to Omar Khadr, a convicted Al-Qaeda terrorist. That should make every Canadian livid at the actions of our Liberal government under the leadership of Justin Trudeau. It's absolutely unforgivable and horrific that occurred And every Canadian should be ashamed of Justin Trudeau for doing that and saying that. That, I think, is very, very important to remember. And that is from page 133, chapter 10 on veterans. And the chapter on veterans, how am I doing for time here, is quite poignant because he talks a lot about the Veterans Memorial Hospital in St. Anne de Bellevue, where I spent time when I was studying at the college there. And we used to visit the what we considered the Veterans Tavern in town called Cousineau's, where the veterans would come and they would order their stein, or they would call it a bock in French, at Cousineau's Tavern, men-only establishment, and they would put a little shot of salt in their beer, and they would basically be in there all day and just nursing their beer over time. And once in a while you'd hear stories from them about their experience in the war. So yeah, he talks about the first time climate change was mentioned in a throne speech by a prime minister. That was in 1994 with Jean Chrétien. And he goes through and gives some details about the throne speeches that were made by various prime ministers over time, which is quite interesting. And then he gives his summary on how to move forward, his recommendations for Canada and for the Canadian military in particular. And he mentions, as a summary, he says, a little patriotism in Canada doesn't hurt, right? Our flag is what we fight for. Our flag is what we show up for, right? He talks about how important the Canadian flag is. There's only one flag that unites all Canadians. It's the Canadian flag. It's not the Pride flag or any other special interest group's flag. Any protocol expert will tell you nothing supersedes a nation's flag on its own territory. Those are his words from page 162 and 163. He talks about the importance and significance of the Canadian flag, and then he concludes the book here with his final thoughts. So, very well written book, very thoughtful, a very brief read, no waste in this book. So I do recommend for Canadians, if you want to get a snapshot on the current state of Canada's defense capabilities or military, or also on his views on, he's basically towing the line on some of the Conservative Party's policies. I think it's quite commendable that he's taken the time to put down his thoughts to paper. And I don't know what his political aspirations are, but he would probably be a strong candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada. I don't know if that's his plan or not, but he certainly would be a valuable sounding board or a consultant for them based on his 30-plus years in the Canadian military. I believe he served 35 years in the Canadian military and also served all over the world. So he's got a very impressive track record representing Canada all over the world on various military operations: Cyprus, Bosnia, Afghanistan, France, all over the place. So a good read for anybody interested in that specific area, and a lot of solid facts to be aware of. So yeah, Michel Maisonneuve, In Defense of Canada, Reflections of a Patriot. Very good read. And I just wanted to share those thoughts with you. So that's it for today. God bless you. I'm looking forward to 2025, which is just around the corner. And I hope you have yourself a blessed day. Spend time with people you love. And don't forget that God loves you very much, and so do I. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Take care now. Bye. Bye-bye.